So I think sometimes when we look at home and workplace adaptations as autistic people, it can feel like we're supposed to automatically know what we need, which particularly if you've been diagnosed late can be a really challenging thing because you've just kind of got used to coping with things and you might not even have really identified what it is that's causing you difficulty to know what it is that you need to change. So it's something that I think can be a really gradual process after you've received your diagnosis. And for me, I kind of recognised that at the end of the working day, sort of 4 or 5 o'clock, I really need everyone in the house to understand that I should be left alone and not have anybody speak to me at all, because otherwise I become overloaded and I might have a meltdown or I might be just generally not much fun to be around. But that's conversely the time at which everyone's coming in from kind of school and work and wants to tell me all their stuff. So I did have to actually ask the family for that adaptation that I would get half an hour at that time to kind of decompress. But I was wondering, James, as someone who was diagnosed as a child, is that experience of creating adaptations different? And if so, or if not, what does it look like for you?
I think you kind of hit the nail on the head saying that we do get used to how we are and we start paying attention to what we might need that's different as we go on. And I think working in different places, a lot of autistic people only realise what I need once things have gone horribly, horribly wrong, once everywhere's on fire and you start panicking and you know that something needs to change. And then you sort of have to deconstruct it by looking back into what might have triggered it, what might have happened. I found when I was working at home, I was showering all the time, I was brushing my teeth all the time, I was using mouthwash all the time. And I realised it's because I need to have a really clean environment. I need to have quite a nice atmosphere going around. And if there's like dishes and pots lying around, that makes me feel dirty as it was going on. That's not something I worked out straight away. I just assumed it might have to do with the fact that I was eating more because I was at home. And it's just a process of elimination. And I think, unfortunately, when it comes to autism, there never really is that definitive answer. It always is about looking at the individual. How did it affect you? What might have triggered that response? And then sort of trial and erroring it, I guess.
Yeah, and I think it's also really useful to keep in mind that an accommodation might only work for a limited amount of time. So you're kind of never done with that playing detective, figuring out what you need and implementing it and seeing if it works. And then when that changes, being ready to go, oh, something's changed, I need to change that, is really important as well, and not getting too fixed on, but this was the answer and now I don't know what to do, right? I think it's a really interesting question for you, Ros, because you're both an autistic person but also an occupational therapist. So can you give me your perspective in terms of what you've learned as a professional and how maybe you've been able to apply that to your life as an autistic person?
As an occupational therapist, like I try and think of things in terms of like, you know, the person, the environment and the occupation. And thinking about that environment involves looking at the kind of social environment as well. For instance, like who's around. In an office, you have your colleagues around. At home, it might be that you have other people who live in your house around, and it's understanding how your relationships impact with them. And it is, as you know, both of you said, it's very individual to the person and also the time of year. It could be different at different times of year when the light is low. It's trying to be detective to yourself, and having someone to help you do that is really useful. So if you can get an occupational therapist, but that can be quite difficult, especially as an adult with autism. So it is looking at the kind of different things that other people do. So, you know, Googling on the internet and kind of taking it step by step and going, okay, what if I make this small change today? And what if I do this for a week and see how it goes? Because every change you make is going to impact like what you're doing, because it's a change, and we all know that change is difficult to deal with and difficult to manage. So it's like getting used to that adaptation and then seeing if it works, rather than going, oh no, it's not worked the first day, therefore it's never going to work for me. It's thinking about the different things in your physical environment, around sensory needs, around how things are positioned, you know, such as, you know, how clean is your environment? Is it separate from the environment that you relax in, especially when working from home? And if you're in the office, it's, do you have a space to relax? Do you have a space you can go if you've had a really stressful time and you can kind of, I call it defragging, because that's kind of what I do. And do you have colleagues that you can talk to get things off your head? Because that's the thing I found when working from home, is I don't have anyone to speak to. And so just messaging my colleague and being like, I need to have just a 10-minute chat can be really useful for me.
Yeah, I think one of the things that can be really commonly useful for adults who are going into a workplace can be the travel issue. So often you need to be there at the time when travel is likely to be most busy, and you leave at the time when travel is likely to be most busy. So, and a really useful adaptation that like I kind of think could help most people would be to just ask to start and finish a little bit outside of those times. I guess another thing that you could do is actually, if you couldn't get an OT specifically to support you with working out what you need in the home, you could just get someone who knows you really well to notice the times when you're struggling. Because I think sometimes because we struggle with noticing how we're feeling, it can be then difficult to play detective and figure out both what's happening and how we're feeling and what to do about it. So if you can get some support and someone to say, oh, I noticed when you work at break time, you always seem really stressed and maybe it's because of this, then that can be really helpful. So kind of creating trusted people to notice around you and see what might help could be a really useful thing. As someone who is actually, you just told me that you're about to move from kind of a home working situation to going into an office. Is this something that you've discussed ahead of time with your new employers, and what kinds of things are you likely to be asking for?
I think to prepare myself for the move, I think I always knew that I wasn't going to stay remote forever. So I've always tried to factor in what it'd be like being in the office, because autistic people work on routine and regularity. Even when I was working from home, I'd simulate a trip in the rush hour traffic. I'd simulate walking around my local village to sort of put myself in the headspace and sort of separate myself from that waking up to going into the office. So moving from that to that will be the same when I go into the new role. Just keeping that consistency of what you did previously. I think I won't know until I actually start if there will be some change. I imagine there will be some quite radical differences in terms of small talk will start factoring into it, and that's not really my forte. And I think especially because I've been so insular for so long, you didn't really have the opportunity to practice minor little chit chat. You normally just have a call in the morning and get straight to business. I think you've got to play it by ear. If something is going wrong, you've got to reflect on it. Like, I'm quite good at writing down my emotions. It sounds quite strange, but every hour or so I'll try and jot down how I'm feeling, not if I'm feeling differently, just how I'm feeling in that moment. And then you can reflect at the end of the day and see, if at 9 o'clock every day, I wrote that I was feeling a bit anxious, and then sort of work out, was that because more people were coming in? Does that mean I do need to start coming in a bit earlier? Or maybe I do need to ask if I can go a bit later? A sign of a good employer is that they are more than willing to make these adjustments for you.
So Ros, having moved from being a student and training as an occupational therapist into a work situation, I know that it can be a difficult process and it might not happen straight away in terms of asking and figuring out what accommodations you need. Can you talk a little bit about what that process has looked like for you?
When I started work, I kind of went through, at university, I made this strengths-based support plan. So in it, I kind of talk about a strength that I have or a quality. Like, for instance, I'm very honest. And then I talk about how that can be a strength and how that can be a limitation. So in some work environments, like my honesty, it can feel like I'm stepping on people's toes. And then I talk about the kind of supporting strategy that I need. So I sat down with my line manager and I went through this strength-based support plan. So in that case, the kind of accommodation is for me to talk through things with my line manager or another trusted colleague if I felt like I didn't know how to say something. So that's been really useful, but it has been a kind of adjustment period. I've been in the job about 6 months and I'm now coming to the point where I'm like, I think I'm ready to review the support we've put in place and change it. And I think that's the thing that's really important to me, is knowing that you can change things. Like, your support will look different at different points because of your life changes, but also you might not know what you need when you start a new job, even if you have known what you've needed in another situation, because each job is very different. And so having someone that you trust who you can sit down and go, hey, we need to change things up. And I'm about to go through that process at the moment.
I think it's really useful to think of this in terms of not trying to do everything all at once, because I think as autistic people, we can be quite black and white, and we can be quite right. There are problems, let's fix 20 different things, and then all the problems will be gone, and our lives will be sorted and will run smoothly, and then become completely overwhelmed by all the changes that you've made to your life. And so I would definitely urge anyone looking at accommodations in the home or in the workplace to start small and gradually build on that.
Yeah, I'd even say don't start by making changes, start by looking at what's already there. And as James said, taking a note of how you feel in certain situations and when you're feeling stressed and like what's happening that day. But yeah, you want to look at slowly grading the changes rather than just throwing it all in, changing your whole life, and then going, oh, actually, I don't know how to do this anymore.
So I found it really challenging to know how to adapt my home to make it a kind of more supportive environment for me. Do you mind talking through any changes or how you've looked at that in your home?
It obviously depends on what kind of home you have. I currently live in a flat with one bedroom, the main kitchen and lounge, so there isn't actually not much space to sort of move my presence around. Like I know a lot of people say it's a great idea, and if you can do this, it is a good idea, but to separate where you are, to have a study where you work and then you only go in there when you are working. However, I have to do my work in the bedroom, which also means that it's the same place I sleep and wake up. Making sure that I don't go straight from the bedroom to the workspace is very important. Like you need to separate your home life from your work life, and then also structuring your day like it is a day. So when it's time for lunch, leave that room, go somewhere else. And obviously not a recommendation for everyone, and you shouldn't do it just for business purposes, but having an animal is always a really good thing for calming you down, because at work it can be quite stressful, and when you're in the work environment, people can see that, people can help you, people can talk to you, or you can go searching for other advice and seeing different ways of doing things. When you're just alone, it can feel like it's just you tackling a problem. Having an animal just calms you down. You can even just talk to them. Like if you talk, it sounds so strange, but if you talk to an animal or you talk to anyone, your brain starts to unlock the ideas that you might have not realised were possibilities. So just having something else there, someone else there that you can communicate and sort of just let your brain sort of explode onto, it really helps with progress of your work, with the success that you have, and also just keeps you sane in a way.
Yeah, I mean, I think my favourite thing about my animals, I have a cat and a dog, and my favourite thing about them in terms of what they provide for me in my home is they are the like ultimate low arousal companion, in that they do not speak back. They've never got an opinion. And I find that really easy because it means you're getting that company, as you say, and that comfort and that ability to talk to someone without the stimulation that you receive or the sort of lack of control about how they might respond when you're with another human. Ros, you've just recently moved into a new place. And so I was wondering, because you moved in with the knowledge that you're autistic, how did you approach setting up the space, keeping in mind your needs?
When moving in, the initial bit I knew was going to be chaos. And so unfortunately, I was working at the time and I was working from home. And so it was just about having that dedicated desk space and knowing that like that area was where I worked, and I didn't really do anything else there. Doing things like going on for coffee breaks regularly, because at work, if you're in a workplace, you'd usually go and get a drink and have a chat to your colleagues for about 20 minutes. So sometimes I go get a drink and I sit in the conservatory for like 5 minutes just to calm down after staring at the screen for so long. And I think that's a thing that I've spoken to a lot of colleagues who've worked from home, and often they'll sit there and they'll be like, I feel like I have to be tied to this screen because there's no one else around to talk to. And I'm like, I don't feel like that. I don't think that's good for me. And when I do that, I can feel myself being less productive and less good at my job. So taking sensory breaks is really important. In terms of like the physical environment, making sure that there's a comfy space, so the lounge, and knowing that I could go there if I really just want to go and like sit on the sofa and have a space where I'm like, I curl up in my blanket. But yeah, I think it's thinking about what you're using the different environments for, and so making the space fit what you're doing in them.
I think one of the best ways that I've found of figuring out what adaptations might work for me is talking to other autistic people about things that they've tried, and then trialing them ourselves and sort of sharing those experiences can be really useful for figuring out what you might need when you're not really quite sure. So I find that once I've figured out what adaptations I need, I then find it really hard to communicate those needs to the people that I need to communicate them to make those adaptations possible, which means that I end up knowing what I need but not getting it. Have you got any thoughts on the best ways to support yourself when you need to ask for those adaptations?
I think naturally as an autistic person, you worry that you're going to be perceived as blunt. That's such the stereotype. But just lean into it. Just tell people exactly what you need and why you need it. I think if it's going to make you perform better, it's going to make you more productive, then there's nothing that should really hold you back. And if you have an exact idea of what it is, then people love to be told exactly what to do. Like autistic people love to be told what to do. They love to be given the exact direction, no vagueness, and it does apply the other way. So don't worry what people think about you if the result of what you do is going to have such a heavy impact and such a positive to the work and the business.
I love that. Lean into it. People are already expecting you to be blunt, so you might as well just own it, right?
Yeah.
Have you got any thoughts on asking for adaptations and how to go about that in the way that can feel comfortable?
So I would say in terms of asking for adaptations, it can be a really scary thing. And I've had many times where I've been like, I've had it in my head and I've gone into the meeting and then it's been derailed by something else. And so what I've started doing is writing down before I go in. And in the case of the conversation I'm going to have coming up is I'm going to send an email saying, these are the points that I want to cover. And this is just a basic summary of them, but like this is the issue that I'm having. So then it's known by the other person. They're expecting to come into a meeting that I've set the agenda of. And doing that can be really useful, particularly, you know, when speaking to a colleague, because you're like, actually, you know what we're speaking about, I know what we're speaking about. So if I get really nervous and try and talk about something else, that person's got a reference guide for like, no, you wanted to talk about this, so let's pull you back and talk about what you wanted to talk about.
I think for me, sometimes communicating not necessarily verbally can be easier. So if I'm communicating with an employer, then I might email ahead some of the points that I want to make before having a conversation with them, so that I go into a conversation knowing that they're already kind of prepared for what I'm going to ask for. And if I'm communicating with kind of people who are more friends or more informal situations, I find it easier to communicate my needs and adaptation needs via text message. Because I am someone who also has ADHD and says a lot of words, I know that if I put a text together, I can edit it until it feels like I've said it the way that I want to say it and in the most concise way that's likely to get the best impact and improvement for me.
Yeah, the other thing that can be really useful in terms of sending that first email is getting someone else to look over it. Like if you have a friend or family member or even another colleague who you trust, like showing them and being like, does this sound all right? And talking through like what you want to talk about in that meeting. Or if you just want to do it online, talking through what you want to put in that email and what's most important, because it can be very easy to just write a bunch of stuff and then be like, actually, this point isn't relevant. This one I don't really care about, but these are the ones that I really care about. And you don't want them to get hidden by stuff that actually is just stuff that's come to your head when you're writing an email, which is what I do. So talking it through with someone can be really useful.
And there are advocacy services, and some companies might actually employ people that are specifically there to help you figure out your workplace adaptation. So if you're really struggling, that's definitely something I would recommend looking into. So at the end of the day, we're asking for these accommodations. If it's a workplace accommodation, we're going to be able to offer the very best of ourselves to our employer. And if it's a home adaptation, to be completely blunt, I'm just going to be a lot more fun to be around if my needs are being met. It's kind of in everyone's best interest if that happens. What do you feel are the benefits of having these adaptations made for you?
I think the performance in your work becomes a good sort of measure of what's working and what's not working. But I think how you feel afterwards, once the day does end, when you're going off and you're talking to people or you're just relaxing and watching a TV, the fact that you can relax and watch TV and you're not thinking about everything that went wrong or wishing that something was different, then you probably know that you are in a good place.
So if you found this video helpful, please like the video, consider subscribing to the channel and check out the description box for more information.